So apparently there was something of a disturbance in the force in the hockey world this past week. And if you didn't notice that, then I think that could be easily be forgiven. Because women's hockey is kind of like women's basketball. Nobody watches. I mean, unless it happens to be like the Olympics. Yeah, then people watch. But the rest of the time, just really nobody watches. And that is particularly true of these professional leagues. You know, there's a reason why there has been like 3 or 4 different, women's professional hockey league over the past 10 or so years, because the fan interest just is not sufficient enough to sustain these leagues, on a financial basis. It's just not a feasible, the way that they have been attempting to do it. It's just not feasible as a professional sport. Now, that's something that could change, if they decided that they wanted to do things a little bit differently, if they decided that they wanted to put a different kind of product on the ice than what they've been trying to put out. Basically what they've been trying to do is they've been trying to do this thing that, with the exception of maybe like a few minor little details, like a few little rule changes here or there, they kind of want to go on this idea that they're just like the National Hockey League, but they're women rather than men. When the NHL is out there and they're playing like at the exact same time of the year that the Professional Women's Hockey League, the PWHL, is also trying to play, that's just not enough. Yeah, it's just not enough. And in any kind of world where the scales were equal between these two things, that league wouldn't even exist. I mean, and it is very much the same thing as with the NBA and the WNBA, except that the relationship between the two leagues is not nearly as secure between the NHL and the PWHL as it is between the NBA and the WNBA. Where in the U.S. the NBA literally subsidizes the WNBA. Here in Canada, the PWHL, it is very much, it's a creation of the media. And that's something that you really do need to keep in mind as I talk about this next story that I'm going to talk about. So let's finally circle around here. Let's get back to talking about that disturbance in the force of the hockey world that I was talking about. So the PWHL had their draft this last week. And if you didn't notice, like I said, it'd be hard to blame you because nobody really watches this thing. And so absolutely nobody watches the draft. And so in all likelihood, you probably didn't actually hear that the Minnesota team of the PWHL, apparently they don't actually, I understand they don't actually have a name, they're just PWHL Minnesota. They drafted a player out of Wisconsin by the name of Britta Curl. And Britta Curl is not just any other player in the entire women's hockey, in all of women's hockey. She's a pretty spectacular player by all available metrics. And so she has been she has been at the University of Wisconsin with the Badgers for multiple seasons. She's been their captain for multiple seasons. She led them to 3 NCAA National Women's Championships. So by all means, by absolutely no means, is Britta Curl a poor player on the ice. And in any kind of league where they're actually drafting players strictly according to merit, how good a player are they? Britta Curl probably would have gone a lot earlier than she did. She actually wound up not even being taken until the second round. She was Minnesota's, I guess I would say, it was their second round draft pick. I believe she went 9th overall. Now, in any other league, like in any sport where they're actually judging players based on their merit, based on their ability, Britta Curl, a player like Britta Curl being taken in the second round, would be an absolute steal. But as it so happens with the people that are purporting themselves to be fans of this league, it turns out that Britta Curl going in the second round isn't a steal. It turns out that it's an outrage. Not an outrage that a player with this level of ability and this kind of pedigree that she has, the accomplishments that she already has under her belt, it's not an outrage that she was taken so much later than she should have been. Apparently, it's an outrage that she was taken at all. Because Britta Curl has apparently upset the LGBTQ community with her stance on biological men competing in women's sports. And her stance is that she's against it, which she should be. And she should be, not out of any kind of hatred or dislike or even discomfort, with the LGBT community, but simply the reason why she should be against it is because players who are born male and then go through puberty, particularly go through puberty as men, and then transition to decide that they would rather be trans women, that they have a lot of physical advantages over women that were born female, went through puberty as female, women who are women as opposed to trans women. Now, there is this phrase that likes to be bandied about, trans women are women. And I'm just going to come out and say it. I think this is probably not going to be very popular, on a lot of corners in YouTube. I don't think it's going to do me any favors with the algorithm. But as I have already said so many times in this podcast, fuck the algorithm. I'm not going to bow down and restrict what I have to say because I'm worried that it's going to offend some AI's sensibilities. Fuck the algorithm. I'm just going to come out and say it. No, women and trans women are distinct categories from each other. And so then to pretend that we should be sending out, biological women, born female, went through puberty, female, to compete against, biological men, particularly in a sport where we send them out with sticks. And when you hit an opponent with your stick, that's a minor infraction. It's a 2-minute penalty. It's a minor infraction. So the idea to think that we're going to send out, biological women, born female, went through puberty as a female, they are smaller, slower, weaker than somebody who is born male and goes through puberty as a male, to think that we're going to send them out to play against each other in a sport like that is absolute madness. And the fact that there are so many people that have attached themselves to this PWHL who cannot countenance the idea of a player who wouldn't just go along with that kind of madness really speaks to exactly how far gone the PWHL already is. I think that the collapse of this league is already inevitable. And here's the biggest reason why. It's because the PWHL, let's circle back around to this idea that I was talking about before, where in no other professional league would it be even thinkable that a player with Britta Curl's talents, accomplishments, her pedigree would actually go as late in the draft as she did. Because most other sports, today, yes, professional sports, is a business above all else, but it is the business of sport. And so that means that you have to put a team out on the ice or out on the field or wherever, on the pitch, wherever, that is going to have your best opportunity to win, because winning ultimately is what makes you money in the field of professional sports. It's what makes you money as a player. It's what makes you money as an organization. But the PWHL it isn't really a project of sport. It is a project of politics. Not only is the PWHL predominantly a political project, but it's a leftist political project. It is, in fact, a far leftist political project. And if you want proof of that, just take a look at who's, for the most part, actually covering it. I mean, it does get mentions on your, on what you would call like the regular sportscast, which was actually a big part of the media's commitment to propping up this project. But when you get deep into it and you look at the people that actually spend, more than 45 seconds out of a 60-minute sportscast covering this sport, you are getting yourself clearly into what Smash JT calls the nose ring mafia, the blue hair brigade. I mean, it was like this before with the NWHL, and it's like this again with the PWHL. I mean, remember with the NWHL, the so-called journalists that were covering this sport, they were so disinterested in what was actually happening on the ice compared to what was happening away from the ice. Remember that one of the biggest stories that ever actually happened around that league, so far as the people that actually cover that sport were concerned, was the fact that a bunch of players went on Erica Nardini's podcast, and all of these so-called journalists had decided that they don't like Erica Nardini. The biggest story in NWHL history turned out to be that a bunch of players went on a podcast with somebody that they don't like. Not even so much because they didn't like Erica Nardini, it was because they didn't like Dave Portnoy. But that whole thing was, of course, idiotic. I did talk about that previously on this on the podcast, so I'm not going to go into it again at length. But that's where the interest is, from the people that are covering this sport. And so it's really no different now. And so while this garnered almost no attention whatsoever in the mainstream press, because in the mainstream press, it was a very simple story to understand. Professional sports team drafts a good player. But to the people that actually report on this league in depth, it was a travesty. It's like, professional sports team drafts a player with beliefs that are reasonable, but that I don't like because I'm not a reasonable person. That was the narrative that came forth, from the people that regularly cover this particular sport. And so when all of this story first came out, the first kind of expectation that I think that a lot of people had was that, the league was going to stand by Britta Curl, and they were going to say, well, she has her own beliefs. We don't necessarily share them. Although I imagine that probably in most locker rooms in that league, I would imagine those beliefs are pretty well shared. I don't think that a lot of those women are eager to go out and play a sport that, of all sports, is most akin to violence. I mean, make no mistake about it. Sports is definitely it's adjacent to violence. Hockey, I mean, like I said, hitting an opponent with your stick is a minor infraction. You get in a fight with another player in a hockey game, it's 5 minutes in the box, and then you're right back out there. This sport is adjacent to violence more than any other. And I don't imagine that there are many women in those locker rooms that are eager to go out and play a sport that is adjacent to violence against biological men. But people just kind of expected that, the league was just going to put out some kind of blanket statement, just kind of like a go away weirdo statement, chill out weirdo kind of statement. The way that the way that say the way that the Kansas City Chiefs did when Harrison Butker upset this exact same group of people. We hear you, but we're not that interested, and we're going to stick with our player because it's a sports organization. They were kind of expecting that sort of thing, but then something actually really different happened. Britta Curl came out and she apologized. And that really disappointed a lot of people, and actually it did kind of disappoint me too up front. Because like I said, she hadn't really said anything that's actually wrong. And as a matter of fact, what these people are all so angry about is that she won't come out and say the thing that is actually wrong, that would actually be wrong if you said it. But she's out apologizing, and a lot of people were really disappointed by that, and at first I was, but then I kind of had to remember that this league, the PWHL, it is not a project of sport, it is a project of politics. In particular, it's a product of feminist politics, and so with feminist politics, you get the intersectionality, and so now pretty soon it's not enough to just be a woman or be a feminist. Now you have to be in line with all of the other stuff, all of these other so-called oppressed groups, and now you're getting into the oppression pyramid and the oppression Olympics. You have to reach the realization that your fate in this league is not beholden to how you perform on the ice. Your ability to play in this league is not determined by anything that you have ever accomplished on the ice before. It is accomplished by will. It is determined by how well you adhere to somebody else's political demands. And that's the situation that Britta Curl has found herself in. She probably did have somebody from Minnesota tell her, if you don't put out some kind of a statement, if you don't make some kind of an apology, even if you don't actually believe in it, then it's not going to matter how good you are. You're not going to be able to play here, because the people that actually have control over this league, they're not going to allow it. Because it's not about what you did on the ice. It's about what we can make you represent to the most extreme of our political class. There used to be a saying that was fairly popular when it came to these sorts of issues in sport. That saying was just so simple as, if you can play, you can play. And that was a phrase that was used, by the people that supported this LGBTQ community, to tell people that, to give people, to push the idea, and I very much actually do agree with this, is that it doesn't matter if you are, gay or lesbian or whatever, as long as you can play the game, you can play with us. But now it's kind of because it's just that whole thing. Now that they have control of a sports league, that whole thing is kind of gone away. Now it's kind of become like, you can play if you you can play if you will believe, or at the very least say what we tell you to believe or say. I think the ultimate absurdity of the situation actually is kind of embodied by Ian Kennedy of the Hockey News. I've talked about this little worm before, this little twerp. He was one of the guys that wanted to run Ian Cole out of the NHL over unsubstantiated allegations, made by somebody who wouldn't even come forward to identify themselves. To have those allegations, to have those allegations investigated. And I can't remember if it was him or if it was somebody that was writing under him at the Hockey News that basically came out and wrote this ridiculous article that basically said that the only answer acceptable is that he did it. Remember that they had absolutely no evidence to support anything like that. All they had was an accusation by somebody that had basically actually kind of done this thing where they basically, the allegations were made in such a way that they couldn't possibly be investigated. You had no place, no location, no time, no alleged victim, no alleged witnesses, anything of the sort. You just had, he had an accusation made anonymously online. And these people decided that that should determine the rest of Ian Cole's career. And so, of course, a situation like this, I think you know exactly where Ian Kennedy is going to come down. And of course, he's come down hard against Britta Curl. As a matter of fact, he is one of the few people that has actually really bothered to cover this thing in any kind of formal sense, like outside of Twitter. And he actually wrote an article that was literally about, oh, these people on Twitter are upset about Britta Curl being drafted. And so the ultimate absurdity of this professional women's hockey league has actually come down to the detail that Ian Kennedy, ostensibly a man, near as I can tell so far as I'm aware, suddenly wants to determine which women can actually play hockey in a women's hockey league. Not because of their ability to actually play the sport, but whether or not their views please him, a man. I think that this entire league has lost its plot, and I think that 1, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years down the road, when all of the novelty has worn off and this league folds again, collapses, and goes away, I think that one of the reasons why this league is going to have collapsed is going to be because it has so thoroughly lost the plot. And instead of focusing on what they're putting on the ice, they're focusing on the politics of the players. Because as I said before, it's not a project, it's not a sporting project, it's a political project. And in the end, that's going to be the thing that destroys it. And people like Ian Kennedy are just going to skate on to the next thing that they can ruin.